Men over 50, do these 6 exercises to reshape your lower body and boost testosterone naturally. Start with something most guys never consider. Your legs aren't simply how you get around. They function as your body's power grid, the wiring beneath everything else you do. Every major group below the waist, quads, glutes, hamstrings, calves, connects directly to how your system manages energy, hormones, and stability. When that network runs strong, everything downstream operates better. Digestion, mood, sleep, even focus at work. When it doesn't, you feel consequences that seem to have nothing to do with your lower half at all. Flat energy by mid-afternoon, stubborn weight settling around the middle no matter what you eat, a physique that stops responding the way it once did, even when your effort hasn't changed. None of this concerns chasing a younger appearance in the mirror. It concerns safeguarding the machinery that keeps you capable, mobile, sturdy, and metabolically sound for the next 3 decades of your life, not just the next 30 days. And here's the part worth pausing on. None of this happened because you did something wrong. It happened because biology, left unmanaged past midlife, quietly rewrites the rules without asking permission first. The good news is that the rules can be rewritten again, deliberately, in your favor. Here's the biological reasoning behind the 6 movements ahead, broken into 5 sections, each answering a different piece of the why. Point 1. Tissue isn't just mass. It's your body's bank account. Picture lean tissue the way a bank views deposits and withdrawals. Through your 20s into your 40s, most men make deposits through labor, sport, ordinary daily effort, almost without trying. The balance climbs on autopilot, quietly, in the background of an otherwise busy life. Somewhere near 50, that arrangement reverses. Biology defaults toward withdrawal instead of growth, whether you notice the shift or not. This is simply the reality we're working with, not a problem unique to you. Research indicates adults can lose roughly 3 to 8% of lean tissue per decade past 30, and that pace quickens once you're beyond 50, particularly in the legs and hips, home to the largest, most metabolically demanding tissue you own. Here's what surprises people. This isn't fundamentally about strength in the way most men assume, and it certainly isn't about vanity or appearance. It's about capacity. Plain, practical, and easy to overlook until it's already gone. Lean tissue functions as where the body stockpiles glucose for later use, like a warehouse holding inventory until demand calls for it. Less tissue means less warehouse floor space. Sugar that once got absorbed into that reserve now finds fewer places to land, which is a major reason blood sugar and midsection weight become harder to regulate past 50. Not from lack of discipline and not from eating differently than you used to, but from a genuinely shrinking storage footprint underneath the surface. This is precisely why the 6 movements ahead center on the lower half of the body rather than the arms or chest. It isn't the largest region by coincidence. It's the biggest warehouse available to you. Full stop. Rebuilding it isn't cosmetic. It's restoring your system's ability to manage its own fuel supply, the way a company restores a warehouse to keep goods moving instead of piling up where they don't belong. A neglected warehouse doesn't announce its decline with a single dramatic event. It shows up gradually, in slower turnover, tighter margins, and eventually a business that can't keep pace with demand. Your metabolism behaves no differently. Point 2. Testosterone doesn't vanish overnight. It's a slow leak in a pressurized line. Hormone decline past 50 often gets described like a switch flipping. One day you have it, the next you don't. It isn't that. Picture instead a gradual leak in a pressurized line, one you don't notice until the gauge has fallen further than expected, long after the leak actually started. The reality of our biology, testosterone typically drops somewhere around 1 to 2% annually, starting in a man's 30s. By 50, many men have shed roughly a quarter of their peak output, not through one dramatic event, but through 3 decades of quiet, compounding decline that nobody flagged along the way. Here's what rarely gets explained in a routine checkup. This isn't purely a function of years passing on a calendar. It's mechanically tied to lean tissue itself. Hormone output and muscle exist in something close to a 2-way valve rather than a 1-way pipe. Testosterone helps build and sustain tissue, certainly, but that tissue, especially the dense reserves in the hips and thighs, also signals back toward the hormonal system in ways that support healthy output, When that side of the loop shrinks, the signal weakens, and the leak accelerates slightly, feeding itself in a direction you don't want. This is the piece most physicians skip in a rush 12-minute appointment. You aren't merely waiting on hormones to dictate your physique. Your physique also helps dictate your hormones. Resistance training, specifically the heavy compound lower body work featured in this video, is among the few tools capable of pushing back on both ends of that valve simultaneously, rather than addressing just one side of the equation. Medication can raise a number on a lab report. It can't rebuild the underlying plumbing that keeps pressure steady on its own, session after session, year after year. Point 3. Your joints are load-bearing structures, and structures demand ongoing reinforcement. Consider a bridge. It rarely fails because of one heavy truck crossing it. Collapse comes from decades of load, weather, and wear that quietly outpace upkeep until one ordinary day it doesn't hold. Your skeletal framework operates under the same logic, whether or not you've ever thought of it that way. The reality of our biology: bone density and connective integrity naturally erode with age, and men typically begin noticing measurable loss from their 50s forward. Nothing dramatic happens overnight. It's more like rust accumulating on a support beam that still appears fine from a distance, right up until it isn't. The danger isn't in current appearance. It's in what that framework can withstand decades from now if reinforcement stalls today. Here's where a common daily routine quietly works against you without any warning sign. Gentle strolling, light stretching, staying active through low-load movement feels protective, and understandably so. But bone and connective fiber respond to mechanical stress specifically, not motion for its own sake, however well-intentioned. Structures get reinforced through resistance, the same way engineers strengthen a bridge by adding load-bearing steel, not by letting more cars simply drive over it softly day after day. That's why the movements ahead apply controlled resistance, not reckless impact, but genuine, purposeful load. It's the difference between merely crossing a bridge and actually fortifying its foundation underneath. One preserves the illusion of stability. The other builds the real thing, the kind that holds up decades later, long after the paint and appearance stop mattering. Point 4. Balance and coordination aren't optional skills. They're insurance. Consider this figure. Falls rank among the leading causes of injury-related loss of independence in older adults, with risk climbing sharply as decades pass, often catching men off guard because they still feel capable right up until the exact moment circumstances prove otherwise. This isn't clumsiness, and it certainly isn't a character flaw. It's a coordination system that, like any finely calibrated instrument, drifts out of tune gradually without regular use. Stability rests on a triangle: strength, joint control, and nerve-to-muscle communication. 3 gears that need to stay meshed together to function properly. When lower body strength fades, that triangle weakens at its base. The nervous system's ability to catch a stumble before it becomes a fall lags noticeably, much like an aging machine's response time slows once its parts go unmaintained for too long. This side of aging, well, rarely gets marketing attention, because frankly, it isn't glamorous. Nobody posts about their balance training. Yet it's arguably the most practical insurance a man past 50 can invest in, more practical than most supplements on a shelf. Single leg and unilateral movements, several woven into this 6-exercise program, train that strength stability nerve triangle directly, rebuilding the connection piece by piece. It isn't about looking athletic for anyone watching. It's about ensuring that 2 decades from now, an uneven sidewalk or a slick floor stays a non-event instead of an emergency room visit. A policy you pay into now so you never have to file a claim later. Point 5. Recovery capacity shifts. But the response to effort doesn't disappear. Here's encouraging news buried inside the biology, and it's worth sitting with. A 50-something frame doesn't lose its capacity to adapt through training. What shifts is the recovery window, how long the system needs to process effort and rebuild afterward. Think of it like a company's cash flow. In your 20s and 30s, revenue arrives fast and the books balance quickly, almost without effort. Past 50, revenue still arrives, the system still responds to good input, but it clears more slowly, and the ledger demands closer management to stay balanced month over month. Push too hard too often, without accounting for that slower clearing period, and you land in overdraft, showing up as nagging joint discomfort, persistent fatigue or plateaus that feel like decline, but actually reflect poor cash flow management rather than a failing system. This is exactly why this program avoids maximum effort every single session on purpose. Instead, it relies on consistent, moderate, well-structured load applied on a schedule your system can genuinely absorb and convert into progress over time. That isn't a compromise, and it isn't settling for less. It's the correct strategy for a system whose accounting department simply runs on a longer cycle now than it did 30 years ago. And a strategy that respects that cycle outperforms one that ignores it every single time. Here's where that leaves you. All 5 pieces together. Lean tissue functions as your storage system. Hormones and tissue influence one another in both directions, not just one. Bone and connective fiber require genuine, deliberate load to stay reinforced over time. Balance is trainable insurance against an ordinary afternoon going wrong, and recovery isn't sluggish because you're broken. It's sluggish because the accounting simply demands more patience and more care than it used to. None of this concerns chasing how you appeared at 30, and it never will. It concerns staying capable for your knees on a hike, your footing on a ladder, your stamina at the close of a long day, and your independence 2 full decades from now when it matters most. The 6 movements ahead were selected deliberately because each one speaks directly to a mechanism we just covered together. Nothing extreme. Nothing demanding hours you simply don't have in your week. Just consistent, well-placed load applied to the network that runs your entire physique, session after session, month after month, until the trend line quietly bends back in your favor instead of away from it. Think back to that daily habit we opened with. The light stretch, the short stroll, the sense of having done enough for the day. It isn't the enemy here. It simply isn't the lever that moves any of the 5 systems we just walked through. Awareness is the first shift. The second is choosing a lever that actually reaches the machinery underneath, which is exactly what the work ahead is built to do. If this gives you something useful, subscribe to Primespan After 50 and turn on the notification bell for another research-backed video on longevity, science, vitality for healthy living. I'll see you there.